here. Okay, so today we're going to talk about protecting your CDL, protecting your small business, and protecting yourself. So even here at Crete, we sometimes get bad dispatchers. I'll be cruising along, everything's good. Oh, I lost our light. All right, and they'll change dispatcher on me, or they'll change operations manager on me. You know, I I was doing fine, then somebody got fired or whatever, and things change. Well, we're having lighting problems. Okay, so you just keep in mind that one load is not going to break your career or your success. It's what you want is consistency over a long period of time. This is going to be how you win is through consistency, year over year over year. So I've been driving now for 11 years, perfect driving record, no accidents, no speeding tickets, no service failures, nothing. Perfect driving record. And every once in a while, I get somebody new at Crete that doesn't know the Crete way. Crete's very, very safe. And every once in a while, you get someone who will ask you to do something stupid, and you just have to tell them no. It's unfortunate. I think they just don't know. They either don't know you as a driver, or they don't know the Crete culture, Crete history. So I told them no. I had an incident yesterday. Trailer was overweight, and they really wanted me to haul that load. I just stood my ground. I said, nope, not gonna do it. And different people was like, call me and say, well, I used to drive, and you can do it. And I'm like, I've been driving for over 10 years, perfect driving record. I said no. And at the end of the day, I won that battle. Unfortunately, you do have to fight these battles. Even at Crete, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And it just reinforces this idea that you can go from being a hero truck driver to zero, nothing, and faster than a New York second. It's amazing. One time they'll ask you for a favor, and then the next time, they totally forget that you just did them a favor the day before. That's typical of a large company. You got 5,000 drivers. They're not gonna remember who did what. So you just got to protect yourself always. Protect your CDL at all times. One load is not worth you getting points on your license, or going through a CAT scale, or go through a weigh station and be overweight. They got 5,000 drivers. Let them have another one of their drivers haul it. And if the push comes to shove, I have financial security. I've been on this channel trying to share what I know to other drivers on how to build wealth. So I am financially secure. And if push came to shove and they're like, look, you got to do this or else, I'll be like, or else. I don't care, because I have perfect driving record as CDL with over 10 years experience. I'll have more companies lined up by the end of the day that I know what to do with who want to hire me, including Walmart, and other big box carriers. And if you think you're going to put a financial squeeze on me, you're mistaken, because I got, enough to fall back on that satisfy me for months on end. So when you think about positioning yourself for success, you're also positioning yourself strategically to say no. No is a very powerful word, very powerful, and you have to learn how to do that as an owner-operator. You just got to get in the habit of saying, I'll be damned, but the answer is no. It's like, I'm not doing it. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you say. I'm not doing it. Because my CDL and my company comes first before Crete. I can find another carrier. I mean, I could go on the spot market if I really wanted to. But what I can't do is sacrifice my CDL trying to satisfy the demands of the day for one load. It's like, nope, not worth it. See, the problem was I got the shipper, and I won't name names, but I got at a shipper, a large company, and they had an on-site scale, and I scaled the load, and it was overweight on the drives. Perfectly fine on the steer. I had 300-400 pounds to go on the steer, and so I slid my tandem, scaled again, and I'm still overweight on the drives. So I go on the shipping and I share them my weights, and they said, too bad, we're not going to rework it. That's your problem. I'm like, okay, so I called Crete and, waited a couple hours, customer service and all this stuff. And, they really screwed up. They had me leave the property. And then once I left, they wouldn't let me back on. And I told, then Crete's like, well, just go ahead and take it. I'm like, nope, not going to do it. I'm not hauling this load. It's overweight. And I agreed to bring it back to the Crete terminal, and I dropped it, and now it's their problem. It's not my problem. I communicated with the customer while I was on site. I communicated with Crete while I was on site. Everybody wanted me to get off the property. I got off the property, but I'm not delivering that load. And these are some of the battles that you'll have to face. You'll have to decide where's your priority. What's more important to you. Trying to please a faceless corporation that that will never appreciate anything extra you do. I mean, if you haul that load, you're the hero for the day, but the next day I guarantee you'll be back to zero. It's not necessarily the fault of any large corporation. It's just that the size of the corporation is such that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of drivers, and they're not going to keep track of who does their favors and who doesn't. And every time they ask for a favor, you just got to think, okay, is it legal? I don't mind doing a favor if it's legal. Like, they want me to switch loads with another driver. If I got the hours of service to do it, that's fine. I'll do it. If they need help getting a load delivered because another driver ran out of hours, or whatever the situation may be, repower a load, as long as it's legal and I have the hours, that's fine. I'll do it. I'll help out. I'm not totally against being a team player, but when the load is illegal, no way, absolutely not. One load can just ruin things. And if you ever had a state trooper yell at you, you never want to experience that again. I ran into that in Virginia years ago, and it was for something minor, but the guy went total ape shit on me, and I was nice as I could be, but he let me go with a warning. But I had to take an ass chewing for 30 minutes before then, and it's like, look, these loads have to be perfect. If that's not perfectly legal, I'm not taking it. And it's like I got past 3 weigh stations between here and the customer, and different states, different state troopers. Who knows what kind of mood they're going to be in? You can't risk your career for one load. You can't risk your career for one carrier. You're going to be driving truck for 20, 30 years. You got to protect yourself. You could always find another job. I guarantee you can find another job, probably even a better job. But once you make a mistake, you can't correct that mistake. Once the state trooper has you, you can't go back and say, oh, my bad. Let me go. I won't do it again. Too late. They got you now. And some of these state troopers enjoy that. So you're gonna make their day. You're gonna make them happy. You're gonna be feeding the bears, as they say. Don't feed the bears. So if you don't want to get your ass chewed out by a state trooper, then you better make sure your weights are right and stand your ground. And at the end of the day, I won that battle. Because I know what Crete culture was. I know that they put safety first. It's just sometimes dispatchers, even operations managers, don't think clearly. They're just thinking about getting that load delivered. But if they thought about it, then they probably would, come to a better answer. But at the time, It was like, well, that's no big deal, run it. Well, it is a big deal. It's a big deal for the driver. You know, you get stopped at a weigh station. Your asset manager is nowhere to be found. Your dispatcher is nowhere to be found. That operations manager, he went home. He don't care. You know, and you got to go through all this ordeal, and the next day they'll find another driver, and they'll repeat the cycle over and over again. You know, you're unfortunately in a big corporation that has thousands and thousands of drivers. You're the truck number. You're just a number. You're just a number. You're just a driver, and they're there to push you, to haul them loads. You know, different people in the corporation have different roles to play. You know, obviously, safety department would say no. You know, legal would say no. Operations would say yes. You know, so different roles, different in the organization have different parts they have to play. Operations is there to keep you moving. You know, but if there's a problem, you have to stand your ground. And if you need to, call safety and review it with them. Say, look, I'm overweight. Have we changed company policy here? Since when did we start hauling loads that are overweight? I guarantee you safety will get that straightened out. But unfortunately I had to spend the entire day doing that, and that's okay, because what we want to be successful is consistency, year over year over year. One bad day is not going to make a difference. One bad week, one bad month, not going to make a difference. The law of averages is what you're after. It's like, on average, I'm going to be successful over month over month over month over month. One load is not worth me putting my CDL at risk or my small business. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.